Now let's turn our attention to Africa. 2 coups have taken place in a span of about a month, both in former French colonies, in West Africa's Niger and Central Africa's Gabon. And in both cases, they were led by members of the Presidential Guard. These were men who were supposed to protect the presidents. Instead, they put them in detention. Now, in both Niger and Gabon, the presidents are being held in their respective presidential palaces. So a lot of similarities, but that's where the list ends. There are differences too. In Niger, for example, the coup is overtly fueled by an anti-France sentiment. And it's a very strong sentiment. The new junta are relying on it for popular support. They hope to draw legitimacy from this anti-France sentiment. So every other day, there's a new salvo fired at the French. First, Paris was asked to recall its ambassador. Then the junta targeted French troops. France has a permanent troop presence in Niger. The junta told them to remove the soldiers, to take the French soldiers away. France ignored both the demands. Paris says it does not recognize Niger's new junta. It says Mohamed Bazoum is Niger's rightful leader. He's the ousted president, Mohamed Bazoum. Even in detention, he refuses to step down. And the French president, Emmanuel Macron, has showered praise on him. Macron says he speaks to Bazoum every day. And all this has incensed Niger's military.
The government of the Republic of Niger has followed with dismay the remarks made by the President of the French Republic during his address to the French ambassadors. These remarks constitute a further blatant interference in Niger's internal affairs.
So France has become an unwanted guest, one that refuses to leave. And this is the line taken by Niger's junta and their supporters. And there are thousands of these supporters. They back the new military leaders. They're targeting France. They've surrounded the French military base near Niger's capital. The city is called Niamey. There's a French base near it. It houses some 1,500 French troops. The coup supporters want them out. For days now, the people of Niger have been protesting here. Tens of thousands have surrounded the French base. They're demonstrating peacefully and creatively. They've been displaying coffins bearing the French flag. It signifies the death of French influence in Niger. Women have been using cooking utensils to demand that the French leave.
They defy our governments, they defy our laws, and they, who call themselves Democrats, do not respect democracy. That's why we women thought that the men insisted. They persisted. We planned to change the order of departure to bring out our utensils to come to make noise so that the message can pass. That they say that it is not the men, it is all the Nigerians who demand their departure.
Stages have been set up around the base. Musicians have been performing there. People have been on a sit-in for 2 nights now. And they say they won't leave until the French are gone.
France will leave. This is our home. They are going to leave whether they want to or not. If they won't leave, we are here. We are going to stay. Even if it's 100 years, we're going to stay here. We are determined and France will leave.
The French were forced to leave Mali and Burkina Faso too. 2 other West African nations that have also seen coups in recent years. But in Niger, Paris is resisting. It has threatened to retaliate in case of violence and is hoping that somehow the coup will be reversed, perhaps with intervention from the West African bloc called ECOWAS. That's the Economic Community of West African States. The acronym is ECOWAS, ECOWAS. And while all of this is happening in Niger, there is relative calm in Gabon. Gabon too was a French colony, and it also houses a permanent French military force. But so far, the anti-French rhetoric in Gabon has been subdued. Instead, the anger is focused on the Bongo family, the family that has ruled Gabon for about 55 years. President Ali Bongo has been ousted and is in detention. His son, Noureddin Bongo Valentin, has also been arrested. Their loyalists are also being imprisoned. Meanwhile, this happened today.
Je jure devant Dieu et le peuple gabonais.
I swear before God and the Gabonese people to loyally preserve the republican regime, to respect and uphold respect in the transitional charter and the law, to carry out my duties for the higher interests of the people, to preserve the gains of democracy, the independence of the homeland, and the integrity of the nation's territory.
That is Gabon's new president of the transition, General Brice Oligui Nguema. He was sworn in today in a ceremony full of pomp and pageantry. It's not like the brusque declaration in Niger where it was just announced that General Abdul Rahmane Tiani was in charge. Gabon's coup looks more aristocratic. In Niger, the junta had said it will hand back power to civilians in 3 years. Negotiations are on with neighboring nations. The West African bloc ECOWAS wants a 9-month transition period. Algeria has proposed a 6-month period for the junta to give up power. Now, none of these have been accepted, but talks are still on. In Gabon, we still have no transition timeline. Even though there's a president of the transition now, the one you just saw, Gabon's military has said that it will proceed, quote unquote, without haste. That a new constitution will be drawn up, that new democratic institutions will be put in place. It sounds like a long drawn out process, especially if they go about it without haste. Add to all of this the fact that Gabon's new leader is related to the Bongo family. He's a cousin of Ali Bongo, with supposed ties to his half-sister Pascaline, who loyally served in their father Omar Bongo's regime and allegedly promised to take care of the family. When you consider all of this, then Gabon's coup seems a little different, less about doing away with French exploitation and more about internal politics. France has condemned the coup in Gabon. It has suspended military cooperation with the new regime, but it's not antagonizing the new rulers like it is in Niger. And that may change in the near future, but it could also be that Gabon's new leader takes a leaf out of his cousin's book, keeping ties with France alive for mutual benefit. Here in India, we love guests. The hospitality, the respect, all of it comes naturally to us. But this respect is supposed to be a two-way street. You give and take respect. Someone should tell that to Xi Jinping. He was supposed to be India's guest at the G20 summit, but he won't be coming. He's pulled out at the last minute. Now, to be fair, the chances of Xi Jinping coming were always low. We kept hearing reports of his possible absence in New Delhi, but until today, it was not confirmed. It was not official. And that signals China's intentions. Because Xi Jinping is not the only leader who is not coming to India. Vladimir Putin is not coming either. But look at how Putin handled his absence. He called up Prime Minister Modi last Monday. He personally informed Modi about his decision. Compare that to Xi Jinping. He let the rumor spread. He allowed the speculation to grow, and just 5 days before the summit, he makes it official. No explanation, no phone call to the host country, just a statement during China's regular briefing.
At the invitation of the Government of the Republic of India, Premier of the State Council Li Qiang will attend the 18th G20 summit held in New Delhi of India on September 9 and 10.
So Xi Jinping won't come. Instead, his number 2, the Chinese premier, will attend. Why could that be? Let's look at the backdrop of this G20 summit. It is being hosted by India, arguably China's biggest regional rival. The last 1 month has been very different for India and China. India landed a spacecraft on the moon. India is also the fastest growing major economy in the world. So the whole world was cheering us on. And China? The exact opposite. Their economy is slowing down. Every day there is talk of a debt bubble bursting. Now imagine you're Xi Jinping. If you come for the G20, you give India more press coverage. Meanwhile, you end up being just one of the 20. But by not coming, you make the headlines. You snub the hosts and the West. That seems to be Xi Jinping's thinking. He was more than happy to visit South Africa for the BRICS summit. And why not? China faces no criticism within the BRICS. In fact, Xi got the biggest red carpet in Johannesburg. But in New Delhi, he won't. Chances are he will face questions and criticism. So rather than face it, Xi Jinping has chosen to skip it. And frankly, it's a missed opportunity. Because the Chinese president rarely travels abroad. So meetings like the G20 are a good chance to mingle with friends, with allies, and with rivals. US President Joe Biden was hoping for a meeting with Xi Jinping. He says he's disappointed by Xi's decision.
I am disappointed, but I'm going to get to see him. Thank you.
Normally we say speculation does not help. But in this case, perhaps it does. It's important to understand why Xi Jinping is not coming. Is it because he thinks the G20 is worthless? Is he moving on to BRICS Plus? If so, the G20 faces a big challenge because China, at the end of the day, is home to 1.4 billion people. It is also the second largest economy in the world. So a G20 without China is certainly less influential. But on paper, Beijing has denied this. They claim to attach, quote unquote, great importance to the G20. Listen to this.
I can tell you that the G20 is a major forum for international economic cooperation. China has always attached great importance to and actively participated in relevant activities.
Which brings us to the second possibility, the one we mentioned at the start. His differences with India. The border dispute in Ladakh is yet to be resolved, and now there is talk of a new flashpoint, water. India and China share the Brahmaputra river system. China has 11 dams on this river. What's more, it is located upstream. Experts believe China can squeeze India's supply in case of a war. So what is New Delhi doing? Making dams of its own. Last month, India decided to revive 12 hydropower projects, basically dams. All of them are located in Arunachal Pradesh. Put together, these dams will cost around $15 billion. Reports say they have two purposes. One is the obvious one, to generate electricity. The second is strategic, to protect against China's upstream advantage. India is also making some military moves. The Air Force has begun major drills along the border with China and Pakistan. It is called Exercise Trishul. And the Air Force has called in the big guns for this one. Fighter jets like the Rafale and the Sukhois will be taking part. So will C-17 carriers and attack helicopters. The drills will run from today until the 14th of September, which means throughout the G20, this drill will be on. If Xi's absence was China's message to India, then these drills are India's message to China. And it's an important message because Xi Jinping's absence is not a reflection of New Delhi's presidency. India can only invite people. India cannot force them to come. So this episode reflects more on Xi Jinping himself, his failures at home, his differences with the West, and his inability to lead the global South. And speaking of going beyond enemy lines, here's what Turkish President Erdogan is doing. Here's where he is, at least technically. Erdogan traveled to Sochi today to meet Vladimir Putin. It's a Russian resort town on the Black Sea. There was a lot of speculation around this meeting. It wasn't clear when or where this meeting would happen. First, Putin was expected to visit Turkey, and that would have been huge. The Russian president meeting a NATO leader inside NATO territory. Maybe that's why the plan was dropped. But finally, they picked Sochi. Putin welcomed Erdogan with a handshake and a smile. Afterwards, they got down to business. The big issue was the Black Sea grain deal. Erdogan was pushing Russia to revive it, but today he had no luck. Putin said the deal cannot be revived unless his conditions are met. Listen to this.
As I have said more than once, we were simply forced to make this decision. Russia was forced to do it, as Western countries blocked and continue to block the grain deal in terms of ensuring access of Russian agricultural producers to world markets. Well, it can't be tolerated further.
Not surprising though, Russia's actions always suggested this would happen. Take a look at these pictures. They show the Ukrainian town of Odessa on fire. It was attacked by Russian drones on Sunday. At least 2 people were injured. Now, Odessa is a port town. Ukrainian grain is shipped from Odessa to the world. So why did Russia attack it? To send a message that their position will not change. So Putin's decision is not surprising really. But one of his comments stood out. He said there is no shortage of food grains, there is only a distribution problem. Listen to this.
The termination of the grain deal did not affect the global food markets. I would like to emphasize this in particular. No matter what is said about this, grain prices continue to decline. There is no physical shortage of food. There are problems with its fair distribution, that's true. But this has nothing to do with the so-called grain deal.
Well, technically he's right. There is a distribution problem. But many people would say that the problem is Russia, that Putin's position is making a bad situation worse. Erdogan knew this would be the likely outcome today, but he pushed for it anyway. The Turkish president wants Ukraine to soften its stance, to strike a deal.
In this context, we prepared a package containing new suggestions in consultation with the United Nations. I think it's possible to get results with this new process. As Turkey, we believe that we will hopefully reach a solution that will meet expectations in a short time. Especially Ukraine needs to soften its approach on the point of being able to take mutual steps with Russia.
So the big headline is this: the Black Sea grain deal will not be revived. At least not today, which makes you wonder, why is this deal so important? Time for a quick recap. The Black Sea is located to the south of Ukraine. It is the only way to ship anything out of the country, out of Ukraine. But when Russia invaded, they blocked the Black Sea. They said all vessels were fair game, even commercial ones carrying food grains. This is when the United Nations and Turkey got together. They brokered a deal between Russia and Ukraine. And what did the deal say? That Ukraine could ship food grains from 3 ports. And in return, Russia got some concessions. They were allowed to sell food and fertilizers. In July 2023, this deal was up for renewal. Putin said, we won't do it. He said the West was not keeping its word, that Russian food exports faced a lot of restrictions. Which brings us to present day. Only 3 Ukrainian ships have left the Black Sea since July. All 3 without Russia's permission. If Moscow wants to, they can attack these ships. I'm sure all of this sounds complicated, but I bet you too have felt its impact. Wheat prices have increased 10% since July. Food inflation is rising globally. One of the reasons is the collapse of this deal. Just ask Erdogan, why do you think he's brokering this deal? It's certainly not because of compassion. Erdogan is doing it for political gains. Turkey's inflation was almost 60% in August. It was 47% the month before. To make matters worse, Erdogan thinks he's a financial genius. He doesn't believe in interest hikes. He thinks cutting interest rates will control inflation. Clearly, it's not working. But who will tell that to Erdogan? He needs this grain deal to cool prices down at home. If not, he needs a backup plan. And guess who has one? Vladimir Putin. He has presented a proposal to Erdogan, 1 million tons of Russian grain at discounted prices. Talk about a sweetener. Turkey gets the food grain and Russia gets Erdogan off their back. It's not clear if Ankara will accept this deal. But one thing is quite clear, Putin will keep leveraging food grains. He realizes it's the best way to put pressure on NATO. Having said that, it is a double-edged sword. So far, most of the developing world has refused to condemn Russia's war. Will they keep doing that when inflation hits double digits? When Russian rockets destroy Ukrainian grain? That's the risk for Putin. There is one more leader who's not coming. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. He wanted to attend the G20 summit, but he did not get an invite. Ukraine is not a G20 member, although the war in Ukraine will feature prominently in the conversations this weekend. And just ahead of the summit, there's been a shake-up in Kiev. The defense minister has been sacked. His name is Oleksiy Reznikov. Reznikov was made defense minister in November 2021, and during the war, he emerged as an important figure. He built up support for Ukraine in the West. One of his key tasks was to lobby for powerful weapons, and he did it. But in recent weeks, some reports emerged. They said his days in the defense ministry were numbered. And yesterday, President Zelensky put an end to the speculation. He confirmed Reznikov's exit.
This week, the parliament will be asked to make a staff-related decision. I would like to outline it now. I have decided to replace the defense minister of Ukraine. Oleksiy Reznikov has been through more than 550 days of full-scale war. I believe that the ministry needs new approaches and other formats of interaction with both the military and society as a whole.
A new approach, that's what the president wants. And it is a fact that the current approach is not working. A few weeks back, Ukraine launched a counter-offensive. There was a lot of hype around it. They wanted to retake occupied territory. They wanted to push the Russians back. None of it is happening. It proved to be a costly and futile exercise. And now there's going to be a change of guard. Does that mean Ukraine will wrap up the counteroffensive? It's hard to say, but one thing is quite clear. Reznikov's exit is not just about military strategy, it is also about other things. There is more to this story. Two broad reasons behind his exit: corruption and narrative building. Now, corruption is an old issue in Ukraine, especially in the defense establishment. It is mired in graft cases. There have been serious allegations. One of the cases is about military rations. They were bought at inflated prices. And what was the value of this contract? More than $1 billion. The case came to light earlier this year, and soon it snowballed into a major controversy. Reznikov was the defense minister then, but he did not sign the contract, and yet he was the one who came under fire for it. The civil society criticized him. They said the buck stops with the defense minister. He, on his part, called it a smear campaign. He pushed back against the criticism, but he wasn't really able to sway public opinion. Because this is not a one-off. Ukraine's army is plagued by corruption. Multiple scandals have come to light. Corruption in medical exemptions was investigated. Conscription officials were caught taking bribes. And some cases are truly incredible, like this one. Ukraine's enlistment offices were audited. One recruitment chief was caught. Doing what? Using soldiers as his personal servants. They were sent to his private estate and used in construction activity. Soldiers. All of this happened on Reznikov's watch. So while he wasn't personally implicated in any case, on the anti-corruption front, he seemed ineffective. And perhaps Zelensky thought a change was necessary. Also, Western allies have poured billions of dollars into this war. The last thing they would want is for that money to be lost in corruption. And they would ask questions if they're not asking them already. Hence the sacking. Reason number two could be the need to build a new narrative. Meet Rustem Umerov, the man who will be Ukraine's new defense minister. He used to be an investment banker and a member of Ukraine's opposition. But since the beginning of this war, Umerov has donned the hat of a negotiator. He's been involved in prisoner exchanges. Also, the Black Sea grain deal, the one brokered by the United Nations, a deal to secure grain exports from Ukraine to the world. Umerov was Ukraine's chief negotiator for that deal. Recently, that deal fell apart, Russia walked out, and talks are on to revive it. So why did Zelensky choose this man for the defense minister's post? Is he preparing to negotiate with Russia? Well, it's a possibility. Kiev could also be trying to send a message to Moscow. Umerov belongs to the Crimean Tatar community. It's an ethnic group in Crimea, a region that Russia took in 2014. They annexed it in 2014. And since then, these Crimeans are said to have been persecuted. Umerov has been speaking about this. In fact, I have a quote from him from 2021. He said, "The deportation of Crimean Tatars is one of the greatest crimes of the Soviet regime. It was started by the tyrants in power at that time in order to exterminate an entire nation." So this appointment could be a political message. And what happens to Reznikov? He could get a different job. Some reports say he could be Ukraine's next ambassador to the UK. We'll have to wait and see. Either way, Zelensky is shifting gears. What about Russia? Their President Vladimir Putin is not coming to the G20 either, although he did get an invite. Instead, Putin is going to China next month. And ahead of that visit, China is extending more support to Moscow. Russian banks are raising money from China. Leading Chinese banks have stepped in. They're giving loans worth billions to Moscow. Which banks are these? Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, Bank of China, China Construction Bank, and Agricultural Bank of China. These are among China's top banks. How much is their exposure to Russian banks? Almost $10 billion now. Russia depends more on Chinese banks now. It says it does not want to trade in what it calls toxic currencies. That's the term they use, toxic currencies, like the dollar and the euro. Trade between Russia and China has also grown. Chinese exports to Russia have risen. And what are the Russians buying? Things like microchips, trench digging excavators, goods that can potentially be used by the Russian military. These are called dual-use goods. They have both civilian and military applications. This is what China is giving to Russia. And Moscow can use all the support it gets as the war takes a new turn. Yet another drone attack was reported today on a building in Kurchatov. This is near the Ukraine border. Reports say Russia's intelligence services were using this building. The attack did not cause a lot of physical damage, but perhaps that was not even the idea. Ukraine has taken the war inside Russia. It has changed its defense minister and it's working on building a new narrative. Expect more action in the weeks ahead. And now it's time for Vantage Arts, images that tell the story. It was a crash and burn for the Burning Man Festival in the United States. 72,000 people got stranded after a rainstorm turned the festival into mud, the festival site rather, into mud. Landing once on the moon was not enough for the Chandrayaan-3 lander. The Vikram lander conducted a hop experiment, landing on the moon once again. And move over Jack Sparrow. There's a new pirate in town. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is sporting an eye patch to cover bruises from a fall while jogging. Scholz says he's excited for the memes to come. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1998, Google was founded by Larry Page and Sergey Brin. This was while they were PhD students at Stanford University, initially called Backrub. It began as a research project. The duo wanted to create a tool that would deliver relevant search results to readers. 25 years later, Google is the world's largest search engine. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Couple of